And here we are.
Hello, good morning, and welcome to the Project Failure Files. I'm Sharon Weaver, CEO of Smarter Consulting.
And I am Christian Buckley, founder of Collab Talk, and welcome to another episode of our series where Sharon and I will explore what not to do as you manage projects.
This series is for anyone who manages projects for a living. Maybe you've held the title of project manager, operations manager. Maybe you own your own business, which means you literally manage everything. In each episode of the Project Failure Files, we'll talk about the common pitfalls in project management, sharing personal stories and experiences, and exploring the strategies and best practices to help you be successful.
This is very much the what not to do in project management and why, covering both the theoretical concepts as well as practical examples and best practices.
For this episode, we're going to talk about falling into the tool trap and finding the balance between technology and actual management skills.
It is such a fine line between the two. I'm excited to cover this topic. I know we had a lot of interest in social around this topic.
Yeah, to be honest, I think we're going to have to cover this topic again. There is no way we're going to get through everything we want to share in a single episode.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. We are going to share some great personal stories and advice on how to overcome this tool trap. But we always start out by talking about definitions, outline the topic, do some basic analysis of the problem.
And of course, we'll share some real life stories, examples that'll help you understand the scope of the issue.
We then go into practical solutions, providing you with actionable strategies, because that's the key here. Something that you can take away, go and do to improve your project management skills.
And of course, because I'm me, we always have to talk about the cultural issues of each topic. Because, like we tell you every week, to make any kind of lasting change, you need to understand and address your organization's cultural dynamics.
And of course, we'll share our thoughts on preventive measures too. I know it's a lot to cover in 30 to 40-minute session, but we're going to give it our try.
So let's kick things off and talk about the tool trap.
And of course, please feel free to comment throughout the episodes, share your experiences, any great examples or feedback that may have missed. I'm also going to share some links how you can follow us, how you can participate in the community that we've built over on Facebook as well.
So where do we start?
Let's start at the beginning with a definition of the problem. I mean, Sharon, when you think of tools and project management, or like where does your mind go? What do you think about first? Is it positive or negative?
I mean, I think when we talk to people about project management and tools and techniques, because I want it tools and techniques, techniques are kind of a type of tool.
Yep.
I think about the idea that a lot of people don't even know what their options are. There are so many things out there that do different things all over the board. It's really funny when you talk to people. There are all these tools out there like Project and Planner and Smartsheet and Jira and DevOps. And I mean, and the list can go on and on and on, right? People use all kinds of different tools for different things in different industries. However, I think the biggest thing I think of is that everybody has either one that they know and love, and that's the one they are kind of attached to, or they just say, there's so many tools, I just write everything in Notepad.
Well, I think there's one name that was missing from your list. It's the number one project management tool in the world, still, Excel.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think about this. One of the problems that I've often talked about is this over-reliance on tools. When we work in the technology sector, and so it's easy for us to do it. We're passionate about it. We're excited about all this new technology that's happening around us. I mean, AI is a great example of that. And now I've had people asking or seeing questions out in the community about, well, how is AI going to improve the project management side? It's like, well, don't worry about that. This goes back to what is the process? Are you doing the right things anyway?
Mhm.
And so that's one of the things is like we lean too heavily on the tools to go and do this. And I used to refer to this as, like managing by spreadsheet, managing by Gantt chart. Like you can't. It's the tools, the data informs you. You still have to do the work. The hard part is always the conversations that you have.
Yeah,
So
I agree with that. No, I think there's so many things out there, and at the end of the day, you have to be motivated enough to keep the project moving along. You have to know what to do. You have to know what to track. You have to keep the people doing the things. A lot of people want to depend on the tools to solve their problem. At the end of the day, it's what problem are you trying to solve, right? Are you trying to list all your stuff out? Are you trying to get people to be reminded? Are you trying to find things that's going to give you deadlines? Are you trying, what is it that you're trying to solve for? But if you don't have somebody that's leading the charge and being motivated and making sure that things are happening, then you can write things down in any tool and it's not going to get done.
yeah. I was giving a keynote presentation. It was actually Dan Holm and I, for those that are in the Microsoft ecosystem and I know Dan Holm. He and I were keynoting. We were over in, where was that event? I don't know if it was in Belgium or wherever it was. Anyway, not the point. But we had a very simple diagram for problem solving that perfectly applies to project management. In fact, it was from my project management building PMOs days earlier in my career where I had come across and modified and created this graph. But it was very simple. It was, define the space, create the baseline, the idea of like, you can't solve a problem until you understand and define what the problem is. Then you have the scope. Then you go and start looking at, okay, how are we actually going to achieve that? Now, we actually would say, like, you've got the definition of what that is. It's the current state. And you have the future vision of what you want it to be. And therein, in between, what is going to help you move from this to this state? And again, we're project managers. So having a detailed project plan, having resource management, having timesheets and time tracking tools and mechanisms. How do we, what are you doing for your communications? I mean, all of these different things that are out there are secondary to understanding where are we, what are we trying to achieve, and then
I feel like we need to act like an educational show. For those of you who don't understand what Christian just explained, that's called a gap analysis. And so that's a good term to understand, is the idea of where are we now, where do we want to go, and what do we need to do to get there? That's a gap analysis. And a lot of people think that, who even does that? And I think sometimes it's an analyst that does that. Sometimes it's a project manager to do that. But I think it's imperative that you have that conversation, because to your point, Christian, if you don't know what you need to do, then no tool on the planet is going to know what to do for you. And if you don't get that information, enter that information, and manage that information, no tool on the planet is going to be able to do it. And we were joking about this before the show, but I'm going to bring in the analogy of the garage, because I think when we talk about tools and techniques, we talk about, the idea of, people don't think about tools and techniques like they think about physical tools. And at the end of the day, if you think about a garage and you think, well, I have an Allen wrench set, how much can you do with an Allen wrench set? Well, if you know what to do with it and you have things that need it, then it makes sense. But it's sitting on its own, it's going to do nothing at all. You have to pick it up. You have to know what to do with it. You have to know where to use it. You have to have the right things that you need to use it for. On the same token, if, these people have maybe bought a ton of different project management tools, and I think of people who have invested heavily in very large tool chests. Like, I know this is kind of like a big manly man thing, is to have a gigantic tool chest in your garage that has every tool that was ever created. And the nicer and cleaner and more organized they are, the better. But you can buy all of these tools and have them sitting in your garage. But if you don't know how to use them, you don't have the right project to use them on, you're not trained in the tool. Sometimes too many tools just take up a lot of space.
Well, yes. So there's that problem. But I do like the idea of, and again, going back to the physical tool analogy, is there's a reason why I have like that standing, dozen drawer toolbox in the garage. Do I use those things every day? No. But when I need it for a specific job, I've acquired them over the years. I mean, been, like you, we've both been married to different people, folks, for over 30 years. You accumulate tools. And buddy, Allen wrenches, I think I've got like a dozen, because, you never find them when you need them. And so they're strategically at different places around the house. But then you have those tools. And we've talked about this in other episodes around, like, the PMBOK is a great example of that. So the project management body of knowledge book, the document, I know it's digital, but if you think of that resource for those that have gone and been PMI certified, get their PMP certification, it's fantastic. When I would send my direct reports and pay for them to go through the certification, and they would come back, and I would always tell them, I said, it's great that you've learned all of these things. I never want to see you attempting to use all of them on any single project. Like, it is very much like you've expanded your tool belt, use the right tools to solve the right problem.
Yeah, could you imagine that? Like, my brain is visual. I know a lot of us are visual. Like, could you even imagine, like, it, so you go to, the auto dealership and they literally have every single tool, and they're like, I'll hit on it with this one and I'll tap it with this one. I'll poke at it with this one. Like, come on, like, that's not a real thing. And we laugh when we visualize that, but that's essentially what's happening in project management. When you're like, I'm going to use 8 different things at the same time, you really have to spend a few minutes assessing the project and saying, what kind of project is this? Is it a small project? Is it a large project? What am I trying to accomplish? Is it a long project? Is it a short project? What tools and techniques do I need to, efficiently and thoroughly manage this project in the way that makes sense? And I think the more you understand what tools are available, what tools do what, you're trained on the tools, and then you can identify which tool makes the most sense. Then I think you start having a lot better success with those projects.
Well, I know we're going to talk about culture a little bit later too, but I'm just thinking about impacts on projects. I mean, one of the things is that if you have this over-reliance on tools, and this could be true with process as well. I mean, it can stifle creativity. If you are changing the way that the project is running so that it fits within the limited way that the tools work, like that's a problem. I mean, there could be, it's the right tool at the right time. It could be that there's another tool, another system that better fits the cultural aspects of how do we run projects in our organization. It can also get people, make them blind to the oversight of things that are happening. We become over-reliant. Like, I didn't see it. It didn't flag me within the project. Like, yeah, but if you had been reading the data and participating in the weekly project calls, you would have been aware of this. We would have been able to catch this. So I think it can. And then the other downside is it can be very inflexible or rigid, because again, you're looking at the tool generated reports and dashboards and schedules. And so it can be hard when there's change. You're spending more time making changes just in the tool or the mechanisms than focusing on the project.
But what is that old adage? If you only know how to use a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Right. but now without them, let's flip that around and say that, like, because the other side of the problem is, let's say that you've gone and done that gap analysis and you're building out this strategy. Here's going to be our approach. It's going to be these 5 phases over the next 12 months. It'll look like this is what we're going to do. You started to carve that out there. Look, there are better ways to then capture that information, track that process. You're going to have then missed opportunities because you're decentralizing all that knowledge, all that information. It's going to, not having tools in place will have a direct impact on your communication. And so and I started my career, we didn't have a lot of the tools that we have today. It was very basic. Yeah. And again, we were using
pen, paper, notebooks.
Yep. But it was very inconsistent how that was followed. One of my first companies built a PMO working for the phone company and built out that process. And part of my job, I had my project, but was also there to go and mentor with the other PMs to try and make it consistent. And so I'd refine the process, refine the structure, all the templates, the documentation, all those different things. And it just took time. And a lot of organizations say, I don't have time for all that. But again, you can speed that up by utilizing the right tools.
Yeah, it's so funny because it's so funny you say that, because I think one of the biggest issues I see right now in this particular space is because all we had was pen and paper at the beginning. And I remember when spreadsheets came out, and I remember when Word docs came out, and I remember when we started having more tools than we have now, but everything had to be written, right? Every single thing had to be written down. And it's funny to me now because a lot of project teams are like, well, I put it in the task. I filled out the Jira card. I filled out the ServiceNow ticket. I filled out, and nothing happened. And I'm like, well, did you call them? Well, I emailed them. But did you go to their desk and tap on their shoulder and say, how can I help you? Why would I do that? And so I think from a technique perspective, I think one of the things when we talk about so many different tools that we forget about is the idea that there are kind of these old school tried and true pieces of learned behavior that comes into it. I know I'm getting very curiously close to the culture piece, but this idea of learned behaviors of how do you interact with different people and how do you do things personally. And I think we joke because as a consultant we come in and say what kind of tools do you use, let's kind of integrate with your tools. And I think of the old joke of the pipe the plumber comes in and they say, well, you cost a lot of money, like can you show me how to do it? And he's like, no, because I know where to hit the pipe. And so sometimes I think as a project manager, it's this behavior experience of, I know that if things aren't getting done, there are techniques, which are just like tools, right? There are techniques that I can use where maybe I'm going to reach out to a person and remind them. Maybe I'm going to reach out to a leader and get some, support in that area. Maybe I'm going to escalate to somebody who needs to do something. Maybe I'm going to go into the tools and maybe I'm going to make some updates to get people moving along, right? There are techniques within there that are beyond just using the tools themselves.
Right. Well, and a lot of that too is just again, it goes back to the cultural aspects of what's the organization going to accept. But a great example of when I've been on large projects that I felt like we were getting too much into over relying on the reports, the dashboards, and things where people stopped reading them, they stopped responding to the email reminders, and all that was to go in on a very long project or even an ongoing operational activity was to schedule like a quarterly, everybody come together, all the stakeholders, like here's where we are, this like the state of the nation address, and to walk through and say, here's what we're seeing. We've seen a drop off here. And it's a way to get renewed support from your leadership team. And it's a way to for the new people to get caught up, for the people that have just become like, oh, I forgot. Yeah, yes, that's right. I need to go and do this. And so that's, if you think of like community building, it's you have a community manager, somebody who has that role, whether it's dedicated or not, whose job it is to constantly nurture. Part of a PM's job is to do that nurturing and to refer them back and to make decisions about, hey, this tool is not working or this communication method is not working. Let's change it up. We want to maximize the value of these things. How do we get people more invested in it and their time? So once in a while, it's good to step back, look at that. There's got a great example, a real world story here where of the managing by spreadsheet problem. And this was a clear case of the ongoing. We knew what the priorities were. We knew what the metrics were driving performance of the overall operation. We had the project management tools. We had those issues where we were publishing to a dashboard that we created that was hosted out in SharePoint in our intranet site. Plus, we were doing email promotions weekly. Centralizing all the PMs and analysts would provide their data together, push down email. So we call it spoon feeding all of the stakeholders to this large organization, saying, if you want more information, all the detail is in the dashboard, but go to it, click on it, go here, or respond to the email. If they're email people, fine. We were trying to support it in different ways. But I had the problem where a couple of the managers that they were going and doing nothing but looking at the dashboard and looking at the data points. And the problem there is the dashboard wasn't telling the full story. And just to quickly wrap it up, it's all
good.
It's a performance issue with one employee whose stats were way below normal. In fact, it was one of the lowest number of tickets of projects being handled by an analyst, a support analyst. And so there were started to be discussions at a higher level of firing this person. And I'm like, are you kidding? This was the person who you go and talk to anybody on the team, the other analysts. He was the most senior person on the team. Why he was doing fewer was because he was doing the hairiest problems. Some of them that he was having to, with almost all of them, interact with the product team to get resolution to working with the clients. So you have to be careful with looking at the dashboard and believing that as the story. It informs you, but you need to. That's why, I mean, I'm a huge advocate as part of broader governance of having the body, having the overview group of people to look at those things. Most PMOs will do that. You've got your portfolio review where you talk about the state, you talk about the tools, you talk about the communication, the cultural aspects, the differences between those, so that you can learn from each other and you can adjust when needed.
You're saying we still have to talk to people?
I know, it's the hard part.
World?
Yeah.
How scary. Like, how crazy is that? No, I agree. I mean, I think, on my side, I think, most of my real world stories come from exactly kind of that same place. I think there's a big disconnect because, there's the project team that's working on the stuff and they've got the tools and they've got things they need to enter to kind of keep their life, moving along day to day. And then there's the leadership that's like, I just the facts, ma'am. I just want the bullet points. I just want to know where things are at. I want to look at it quick. And to your point, oftentimes can misjudge based on just looking at a report. And I think a lot of the things that I've ended up doing over the last 10 or 15 years, well, I don't know, I'd say 20, 25 years, is where a leader will come to me and say, I don't want to see it in that way. So you think of developers that enter tickets into a ticketing system, and let's be really honest, ticketing systems don't offer a fantastic view, for the leader of like what's actually going on. And I'm like, okay, well, I can put it in a different thing. So let's say, for example, we're using Jira as a development tool and a tasking tool. And then we go into project as maybe I can see the Gantt chart. I can see this. And I know Jira has some of that functionality now, but maybe the leader doesn't understand how to look at it in Jira. They don't understand how to use advanced road mapping. So now we've got a second tool coming in just to explain it to the leader. And then for that to go to the next leader up, I now have to grab, screenshots of that, throw it in a PowerPoint presentation. And now I have to explain that to the next level leader because it's like, okay, well, here's what's actually happening, but now let me, regurgitate this into very small bite-sized chunks for you to understand. And it's not because they don't get it. It's not because they don't understand. It's because they're so busy working on other things that they want you to do that work for them. And I think at the end of the day, if a project manager understands how to translate task to roadmap to bite-sized deliverable chunks, you'll find real fast that you'll get promoted up and you'll be supported, because I think those are critical skills that kind of come along with understanding how to translate those tools. To your point, like you can roll it up into a report, we can roll it up in a dashboard, it can integrate like within the system. But if you don't know how to then explain that information, I think culturally you're going to start struggling.
Yeah, well, there's always going to be that skill or that need for people to have this skill to be able to take complex problems, break it down into actionable strategies, next steps around that. And
we talk about analysts doing translation. We don't think a lot about project managers having to do translation as well.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why sometimes there's blurred lines between the analyst and PM functions. And again, having worked at organizations that treated them the same, and some orgs where the BA was more of the business analyst was junior, and they all dreamed of becoming PMs and moving up in that other spot, to working with, like I've shared, I did some projects years ago, but with Cisco, where the BAs were senior people. They truly understood like that BA function of, I understand both the technology and the business systems, and they did the translation between the two, where PMs are the execution of those projects. The BAs would help define that, scope that, and then the team leads or whatever would create a project and hire the PM, which was more junior, to go and execute and drive that timeline, that process, manage the budget, whatever those things are. But yeah,
as predicted, we're nearing the end of this, and we haven't, we're just discussing the why and kind of what for. And, I can just imagine there's viewers right now that are like, what tool do I use? You haven't answered the question yet.
Well, that's part of it too, is I think when we jump into like what's actually actionable out of this. I mean, one thing is that you need to have some degree of human oversight of this. And again, this is a person that has built PMOs. I mean, I found my way into that because what I was doing is I was learning about this process, and as a newer PM trying to figure out best practices. What do I need to know? And realize that we need to have standard operating procedures for these activities. We need to have, I heard from in that first job, heard from our director over this division. We were a shared services IT team at the phone company, that I want to see the same types of data for every single project, things that we take for granted now. But I really appreciate being a SharePoint intranet technology guy. And both of us come from that background and both SharePoint MVPs. That I had a client that was in the healthcare space, had hundreds of products. And one of the reasons why they loved SharePoint was the ability to go in and create the templates, which is so much easier now, whether it's SharePoint or Teams, to do that. Any platform has this idea of having this structure. So they knew that this is a multi-geo massive company with hundreds of products like skin creams and makeup and all these different products that they could go and drop into any one of the product sites. And there would be the structure. There would be a folder for the meeting notes. There would be a list of the ingredients. There would be like everything, all the activity around any one of those projects. And it was consistent across hundreds of products. Yes. And that I loved because I understood that right away with this client. And I also understood the complexity of managing the data within that kind of setup. But from a visibility standpoint, again, understand the tools, understand the back end and the effort it takes to manage that activity. Having, though, that human oversight to review what are the tools, what are the process, and look at those things. I'm not talking about bureaucracy, because people said, oh, great, you're going to put yet another barrier for us to go and move forward. Like, no, I've seen organizations where anybody could use whatever tool they want, but then you're responsible for making sure that it's consistent and feeds into the centralized system. And very quickly, having been through that at other companies with other clients, is that they find, no, we want to standardize around a handful of tools, not let it be a bring your own tool. And then providing, so there's that oversight, and then providing regular training, make sure there's integration, and then that monitoring and feedback. And it might be something that, hey, we move forward on this. We thought it'd be the right tool. As we were adjusting, we realized it's not going to meet our needs. We're going to make a shift. That happens. You can't have those conversations if you're not then doing the oversight.
Yeah, I like to use the word rigor. I know it sounds like a little bit of a harsh word, but I know there's a lot of topical stuff right now, books and podcasts on habits and discipline. And I mean, I think there's a resurgence of that a little bit. And I like to use the word rigor because at the end of the day, I come in and I ask clients, what methodology do you have? And more and more, I'm hearing, oh, well, we have this kind of methodology we made up that's a mix of this and this and this and this and this. And at the end of the day, I don't really care what your methodology is. I just care that you have one and you know what it is, to your point, right? So it's the idea of, do you have a plan? Do you have a process that you follow that's consistent across everything you do? That maybe then if it's a bigger project, it's got more rigor. And if it's a smaller project, it has less rigor. But I think, and I think this is 100% what you're saying, and I agree with it. From an actionable perspective, I would say, make sure that you have a defined methodology. Make sure you have a defined process. Make sure you have defined templates and tasks that you use. Whatever that solution is doesn't really matter, as long as you're doing essentially the same thing over and over and over and over, with a little bit of flexibility for what kind of a project or how big or how small it is. Because at the end of the day, I think if you do the same things over and over and over, you tend to do them better. And if you miss things, you will miss less things, because ultimately everybody kind of knows what to expect and they all kind of do the same thing.
Yeah. Well, I think again, if you're having, it goes back to kind of the cultural aspects of this. Like, what is the, what have been people been using historically? What is the culture around managing projects in general? I mean, I'm sure you've had the same experience where I've worked with organizations where someone's hired to go in and lead the change and go in there. And I was actually brought in as an outside consultant for somebody that was hired as a CIO to make dramatic change.
Mm-hmm.
And he knew that his time there was limited because that was all in the plan. The executive
Mm-hmm.
that brought him in knew that it was going to be like an 18 to 24-month project. And he was going to stir things up and upset people with the change that needed to happen. But this executive wanted to rip the Band-Aid, method for that. But the process that when I was brought in as an expert to do that, and I've got stories just around that job where we cleaned out, we found unethical behavior, we found just outright fraud and just different things that were going on in a very rapidly growing company, making a lot of money, and that got them lazy and blind.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of that, the process that we put in place and a number of the tools, the mechanisms that we left behind were there years later. They got sold, they're gone now. But it was, so very proud of the fact that we did that. And the fact that most people didn't know that the CIO was knew that he was temporary. Like he went in there to do it strategically to go in there. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, again, understand the culture of what's needed and be prepared to make those hard decisions. And sometimes that's, and I've had this experience as well. It means that I automated so much, I worked myself out of the job.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good consultant, right? A lot of times a good consultant works themselves out of a job.
So thinking really quickly on preventive measures, and you're right. I think we're going to need to come and look at the kind of the second half of our outline. We'll do this. We will schedule another session in a few weeks
Part
where we
two.
can do a part 2 and go through. But thinking about preventing, how do we prevent the the tool overload, focus too much on technology, and one, I mean, I don't know, what are some red flags that an organization is focusing too much on tools?
I think whenever you ask a question of anybody in an organization, if they don't know what they use, they don't know how they do something, they don't know what's going on. Anytime
That's a
there's any sort of confusion, like that's like a huge red flag for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. If an organization is not doing a regular self-assessment of these things,
Mhm.
if they're not being realistic about where they are, again, going back to that definition, you definitely want to have that for a project. We're going to talk in a future episode about scope creep. There's 20
Mhm.
different angles of scope creep, but that's where that comes from. You can have scope creep not just of the project, but of everything surrounding it. Um, we've all had this, I'm sure. It's a pretty consistent experience where you have managers that deny what they asked. Like one of the things I did as a preventive measure is I would get track and save emails. I would get signatures on things, on plans, on
Mhm.
decisions around there. So it's part of that CYA, cover your assets.
Mhm. Yes,
Um,
100%.
but so again, doing a self-assessment on a regular basis, documenting everything, making sure that you understand what your policies and practices are. Um, uh,
Yeah, I think if you don't have a documented plan, when I go into a company and say, what are your processes? Are they documented? Like you have processes, they're just documented and managed, or they're not, right? Everybody has processes. If you don't know what you're using, if you're not getting ongoing training of some sort, then that's probably a big red flag. If you don't have some sort of a steering committee making those decisions and continually looking at it, like you said, like
right.
auditing on a
Yeah.
regular basis, that's probably a big red flag. If you don't
If
have
you don't,
anything at all,
well,
that's
I
probably
was
a
thinking
big
that
red flag.
if you don't have feedback mechanisms, so exactly, if you don't hear anything at all, it's if people don't feel like they have a voice within the process. And I always say this is one of my Buckleyisms is, the more people understand the process, the more that they will be involved in the process.
Mhm.
So they'll feel they're part of that. And a big piece of that though is that transparency, visibility into what decisions are being made and what we're doing. That if they know that they're consistently having problems with this tool that is being thrust upon them, and they've got better, like if they need to have an avenue to bring that to the table for, if a decision was made, like this is why we didn't go with that other solution that you're promoting. Yes, you're familiar with it. Yes, you used it at a past company, but here's why. Have that conversation. If you never have that conversation, it's part of the transparency, that those users, those PMs will rebel. They will go around you
and create shadow IT.
Shadow IT. I think that's on our list.
Dun, 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 dun.
I know we always talk about shadow IT. We need to add that in, but yeah. So we would love to hear again if there's. We're definitely going to do a part 2 on this topic because it's a pretty heavy topic. Is there anything that we left out that we didn't discuss? Please comment. Let us know. I guess I could add back in here. If you go over to the group we've created out on Facebook on Project Failure Files, and let us know, your horror stories or your best practices. We'd love to hear both of those things. Please let us know. But with that, I think that's it. We're gonna wrap it here. We're trying to be close. We're a few minutes over here. Be sure to follow us and subscribe. Again, there's our contact information. We'd love to connect with you, hear your stories. Of course, you can find all of the past episodes over on YouTube under my profile, Buckley Planet. Of course, you can search for it on Project Failure Files. You'll find it there as well. And this is a weekly show. I mean, we had our initial list of topics that were solid were 34. So 34 weeks of content. We've already added, I think I added last week, Sharon, if you saw on my note, I think we added 2 more topics.
Yeah.
We're doing this one. We're going to divide and do again. So there's 3 more right there. So we're open to adding more. So please follow the series, let us know, and share your feedback, comment.
Yep.
So with that, I think that's it.
Bye-bye, everybody. See you next time.